Hello everyone, I'm Pastor Dylan and welcome to the Dayspring Wesleyan Church podcast. The best way to stay connected to the life of the church is downloading our app. Simply go to the App Store, search for Church Center, and download the app and enter the information for our church. This will connect you to our church community. I pray the following presentation will inspire you to come closer to God in this journey of faith. Enjoy listening.
Good morning, church. Oh, it's good to be back with all of you, and I have to tell you, I am feeling extremely sore today. My wife decided we would do some gardening yesterday, and so that was getting a lot of getting up, getting down, and then she wanted to put some stuff around our, something to make sure the weeds don't come up in different areas around the garden, and we had to put a bunch of stakes in the ground, so my hand hurts. So if you saw me wince today when you grabbed my hand to shake it, it wasn't your strength. All right, it was just, I'm very sore, so it feels very bruised. I did have a young kid make me feel good today, though. He came over, gave me a big hug, and so the hug was great, but then he started rubbing my belly, and I thought, he thinks I'm Buddha, so it's whatever. Anyways, I wasn't here with you last week. As some of you know, I was speaking at another church. Pastor Alex did the service, did a tremendous job. And man, I tell you, I'm so thankful for a great staff and great group of pastors that we have that are able just to do a lot of the services and stuff. And helps you to remember, too, that, this is why a church cannot be built on one pastor. It has to be built on Christ. All right, and so God has given us this ability to have so many other people who speak truth, and so it's fantastic. I was over in Athens speaking to one of our sister churches, which we're just really excited about what God's doing there as well. We are going to be looking today. I want to share a story that I shared. So when I was with you guys the last time, by the way, which was over a week ago now, but when we were done with the service that day, we went home, and then our youngest, Isaac, we put him to bed like at 9:30 typically, and it's down in the basement in our house. And we have another room off of his bedroom, which is just a TV area. And so a lot of times he likes me to sit down there until he goes to sleep. So I'll watch TV. And so I put him down at 9:30. About 10:30, he comes out. And just looked as troubled as can be. And I said, Isaac, you okay, bud? And he said, yeah, Dad. He's like, man, I'm really having trouble with one of the worship songs we sang this morning. And I thought, his mom leads the worship, so so I had to figure that out. And I said, well, what bothered you, bud? And he's like, it was one of the lines that we kept saying over and over. And I said, what was it? And he said, well, we kept singing, set this church on fire. And he goes, why would we do that? And so I had to take some time to explain to him what that meant. And then I got to laughing because the next day we had Chase's graduation party here, and we were trying to cook pancakes on the grill. And because it was so windy out there, I couldn't get them to hold. So behind this sanctuary here is an area that we have just a lot of concrete and stuff, just where we, have some of our junk. And so I decided to cook them back there. And, so I was grilling and stuff. Well, then I came out into the sanctuary, and it was filled with smoke. And I thought, he's going to think we did it. He's going to be like, they said they're going to set the church on fire, and they did it, so... So anyway, if you, with your Bibles today, I want you to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're starting a new series today, and what we're calling it Summer School. And one of the ideas we had is we just wanted to go back to some of the Old Testament stories that are there, these historical accounts. And we think so many times we forget about the Old Testament. We want to spend some time going over some of these that we think should be memorable to us. So this story, even if you're not a believer, you've probably heard this story, and it's more about David and Goliath. And David is one of those guys that, I identify with, and because they said he was short in stature, so I love that, I'm a very short man myself. And as I was thinking about this message and thinking about how to get into it, I thought about when I was in high school. Most of you know, football was my sport. That's what I loved playing. Again, I was the shortest guy on the team, but man, I loved playing football. And I played linebacker on defense, but on offense, I played the center, and then I played guard. And I can't remember which year it was, but when you play center or you play guard, like when you play center, your responsibilities are you either have the guy over top of you and you have to block and make sure it gets pushed certain ways so that the ball carrier can get through, or you have what we call gap blocking, which means you get the guy or the gap down from you and make sure that area is cleared. Well, when you're guard, it's pretty much the same thing, but they have this one play that they let the guard use, and the guard's the one by the center, so the center is obviously in the middle, and then you have the guard. But the guard will do this play, and it's called a trap block. And the trap block is fantastic because what happens is you don't have a gap anymore. You get to do this special move and you get to come all the way over here. And what happens is the guys over here, there will be a guy lined up and their responsibility is to let that guy come through. And that guy will come through thinking, oh, wow, this is, I can make an easier play here. But the guard's responsibility is he gets down and he gets to run with all of his might. And he gets to try to knock that guy down, right? So anyways, I tried to do this first service and I got really sore, so I'll try it again, okay? So you get down and then they say set 2, and I mean with all your might, you take off, you run, and you just plow into that guy, you know what I mean? And it's fantastic because you just send them flying because they never see it coming, right? So we got to play this one team. We were scrimmaging early on in one season, and we were playing a team, we were scrimmaging against Bucyrus. And so anyways, they called this trap. And man, I was the guard, and I just could not wait, So I got down in my stance and stuff. Pastor Dylan asked why I don't get all the way down. It's like, I'm not getting back up if I get all the way down, okay? So anyway, so I got down in my stance. They called set 2, and I took off. And I just could not wait to blast this guy. I came over, boom, and I fell backwards, all right? I felt like I hit a brick wall. And when I was laying on the ground there and looking up, again, I was 5'4", I weighed 125 pounds at the time. When I looked up, I saw a guy at least a foot taller than me. I heard that he was 6'6", and he weighed twice my weight, okay? So when I hit that dude, I just went backwards. I looked up and I thought, I don't ever want to do that again. And as a matter of fact, I kept thinking, man, do not call play where I have to hit that dude. Because that was just incredible. And I tell you, a part of me, it sort of paralyzed me for a moment because there is no way that I could take on that sort of giant of a man. And as I was thinking about that, again, because it paralyzed me. It's like I didn't want to do that anymore. I thought about all the giants in our life that you and I experience. Where at the end of the day, when we size certain things up, we think that that thing is too big to overcome. And so what happens to us, we tend to be very paralyzed. And we tend to think, I don't want to go around that situation. And so we don't really step into things that God is calling us because it's just too tough or it's just too difficult. And that's why the story that we read today, this historical account about David and Goliath, is so fantastic. Because here we have this giant of a man. And then we have what they call the young boy David, who has to take on this individual. And I want you to hear the words that he speaks here, because it is so amazing what he says. But in verse 45 through 47, he simply says this: David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down, and I will cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Man, listen to that power in that. Let's pray together. Father, I just thank you for this courage and this boldness of David. And even though I joke about being the same size, I think sometimes my faith just seems very small and very weak. And I find myself just afraid of some of those giants or some of those obstacles that come into my life. And I fail to remember how big you are, God, in spite of all of it. I pray that all of us today would just be able to ask ourselves a question and maybe reflect a little bit about what are the giants in our life right now? What are the obstacles that seem too big or too insurmountable to overcome? And Father, I pray that at the end of the day, we recognize how big you are and how you can take care of all these things. Father, if there's anything that I would get wrong in the interpretation today, I pray that you would clean it up in the ears of your people so that the only voice they hear from today is yours and not mine. In your name we pray. Amen. So I titled this sermon, "See You Later," and had C's in parentheses, because the points we're going to use today, we're going to have 3 C's and 3 variations of this story, and I want you to hear that. So we're going to start off with a conflict, we're going to give you a little bit of a challenge, and then we're going to talk about the confusion that was experienced in those moments. So and by the way, we're reading through 58 verses today, so I'll probably fly a little bit through those verses and give you some of the points along the way here. But first of all, I want you to understand that when we read in verses 1 through 7, is a conflict conflict that existed is right away we have the giant, which is Goliath. And the conflict that existed as a giant disrupted the camp. So it says, now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Succoth in Judah. They pitched a camp at Ephes Dammim between Succoth and Ezekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle lines to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, the valley between them. A champion named Goliath was from Gath, came out from the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and his iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. So all of a sudden we have this passage, and we have Goliath coming out. And the conflict is simply this, is you have two armies that are going to war. You have the Philistines, which they served other gods. And then you have the warriors of Israel, which is the one true God, the God that you and I believe in. And all of a sudden they're going out to war. But in the midst of the war, in the midst of this battle that they're going to fight, here comes Goliath, which is a bigger than life figure. And when he comes out, we know that he is substantially bigger because now they're mentioning his height. They're mentioning the stuff that he's carrying. Like, they are literally sizing this Goliath or this giant up and trying to figure out what the outcome might be. And so, for example, when they talk about his height, you have to understand that his height was over 9 feet tall. All right? That is what is recorded. He's over 9 feet tall. His coat of armor that he would have had on him at the time, if you realize what that pounds is, it's 125 pounds that he was carrying of extra weight on him as well. When you talk about the spear that was on the spearhead, it says that weight was about 15 pounds. Now, if you've ever seen these guys throw shot puts, it's about 16 pounds, so it's very similar. So if you can imagine a shot put being thrown at your head or at your body, but it's in the shape of a spear and coming with that much force and that much might, that's going to do some serious damage, right? So when they are looking at this giant, they're sizing him up and they're recognizing that this giant is way bigger than anyone that we could ever hope to win against. And I have to tell you, church, and I understand this is true, but I think if all of us were to ask the question, what are the giants in our life? Some of you will remember circumstances or situations where you say, yeah, I had a giant moment or a giant situation or a giant decision that I had to make that seemed like I didn't know how to respond or didn't know how to react. You know, some of you will say that there are some of those things I experienced in the past, but some of you will say that those are the giants that I'm even facing today. Now, some of your giants, for example, could be relationships where things aren't going well, and we've talked about before, with your kids or your relationship, and it just feels like I don't even know how to step into this. I don't even know how to make this right. Like, this giant is way too big. Some of you will notice that it will be maybe in the areas of debt, that you have just surmounted all these expenses and you just feel weighed down by, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to pay those things off. Some of you are stepping into crisis right now with, you got car repairs, you got furnace repairs, and those are things that you weren't expecting to happen, but for whatever reason, like, you're getting the bills for that, and you don't know how to overcome it, and those are becoming giants in your life. Some of you will notice that it'll be a sickness. It'll be a diagnosis that you were giving. And you're looking at that, and you're trusting the experts, but at the end of the day, that thing is becoming so big or so real, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you can make it through it. There, for some of you, and I have to tell you, I just want to be real with you. I've been talking to a lot of people in the church over the last month or so. And I've been sitting in people's stories and been sitting in their situations. And there's some big stuff in some people's lives. There's some deaths that have happened that are just too great for people, and they're finding it hard to walk in. But there's a lot of doubt in people as well. There's a lot of questions about God and why he doesn't step in. And those are all big giants that are happening. There's a lot of insecurity within people in our church. There's a lot of wondering, and when I look in the mirror, am I really in the right job, or am I really in the right situation, or how do I overcome that. And it's really hard to sit with people in those times. And listen, I'm really no different than you. There's a lot of insecurities that I have. There's a lot of doubt that I have from time to time. And I find often that I feel like my faith can be weak at times. And those things can seem insurmountable. And they can just feel like giants in our life. And I want you to know the devil wants those giants to come into your life. Why? Not because he cares about you, but he just wants to hurt God. And so what happens is those conflicts will stir up in our life, and it'll mess with us in such a way. And what begins to happen is we have to deal with a challenge. And the challenge is this, is do we fight in our life? Do we step up to the plate? Do we come and attack these giants in our life and say, you're not going to have this foothold in my life? Like, this is not going to be the thing that's going to ruin me. So you get into verses 8 through 10. It says, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man, have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistines say, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. And so the challenge was to fight, and what Goliath was simply saying to them, he says, I want you to realize how big I am, and I want you to realize how small you are. And do you really think you're going to overcome this? I always laughed when, before we went to sporting events, there's a tactic that either basketball players or football players will use, their coaches will use. But when the visiting bus arrives, what they'll often do is they'll often have the biggest guy come off the bus first. Because when the biggest guy comes off the bus, they look at him and they're like, holy smokes, this team is huge. And they're so focused on that big guy that they don't recognize that the other guys may all be smaller. And they focus on that one thing and they just can't get past it. And it messes them up mentally. And you have to understand that the devil wants to mess you up mentally. He wants you to see these things are bigger than life. And what happens is you and I have to decide, are we going to step up to the plate and fight or not? Goliath said, you guys are so small compared to me. How dare you think that you can come and defeat me? And by the way, if you believe that your God is superior, if you believe that your God is so big, I'll tell you what, one of you come out here and fight me and you win, we'll all serve you. But if not, you serve us. Man, that's a great tool of the enemy. The enemy wants to take and put a giant in your life. And he wants to say to you, if God doesn't show up there, if God doesn't help you out this way, then you step away from God. And where most of us won't say we'll follow the devil, the Word of God tells us this: you can only serve one of two masters. Either you serve God or you serve the enemy, the devil. And so by saying that I give up on God or I don't believe in his power, what you're simply saying is that I'm turning to the side of the enemy, or I'm turning to the devil. And that's how the enemy wants us to react and respond. He wants us to give up and not fight. And so what happens in their confusion, as they're sizing this up, the Israelites now, they're sizing up Goliath. He's so much bigger than us. He's so much more powerful than us. We know how heavy his armor is. We know how big that spear is. After they size everything up, what happens in their confusion is their reality begins to paralyze them with fear. So in verse 11, we hear this: on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul, I want you to notice this, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now, Saul is the king. And the king said, as he's going out to battle, I'm so afraid and I'm so dismayed that I'm paralyzed as well. Now, I have to tell you, when I played football for River Valley, many years we had the worst teams. All right? I mean, again, if you're starting a guy at 5'4", 125 pounds at center, you got a problem, okay? And so anyways, but here's the deal. When our coach came out and looked at us, I'm glad he never did this. Guys, we're dead. We got no hope today. I just say every man for himself. If you can get away from here and not be hurt, that would be awesome. Okay? All right. You never expect your coach to do that, right? When your coach comes in, he's like talking everybody up and he's like, dude, guys, we got this today. We may have lost the other games, but we're going to get in here and fight. We had this one guy on our team. I kid you not, this one year. He was a senior guy. I don't know if he played much, but he decided to give everybody a pep talk at halftime. We were losing 40-0 at halftime. And this senior gets up and he's like, guys, they scored 40 at halftime. We can score twice that much a second half. And I was like, dude, you are nuts. Like, what world do you live in where that's going to happen? You know what I mean? And so, I had lost all the faith in that moment. But when your leader loses faith, that just comes down to the rest of you as well. And so all of a sudden they're feeding off of this from Saul, and Saul's like, this ain't good. We can't do this. And so all of them fall a line as well. And I think, and I know this is true, but when some of your giants come, that you and I get paralyzed with fear in such a way that we're afraid to take on the situations. That we're afraid to respond or react because we don't know what's going to be good. And so instead of investing in the situation, we get out of it, we stop, we freeze, and it's just almost like we just give up. And you can tell when those people have given up in life, and it's tough to watch. So secondly, the second part of the story is this. We have the witness that comes in, and this is in the form of David. And so this is taking place in verses 12 through 29, but we'll read 12 through 22 first. It says, now David was the son of the Raphathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time, he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend to his father's sheep at Bethlehem. 40 days the Philistines came forward, and every morning and evening, and took the stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, take the ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of the unit, see how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left the flock, and in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp. As the army was going out to its battle position, shouting the war cry, Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. So again, that's a lot of reading, a lot of the story. Probably could have paraphrased that, might have even been better for you. But what's happening is there's a conflict that's taking place. You see, David was sent with 3 tasks. The first task was simply take food to your brothers. I want you to give them food because they need to sustain an ability. They need sustenance in order that they might fight the war in the way that they need to. So they need that strength from it. Secondly, it was said to take some food or some cheeses to the commander. And the reason why you would do that is you wanted your commander to be well fed, to be well cared for, because he was leading the group. He had a bigger responsibility, and probably at the end of the day, it might have even been a way of bribing him to say, please take care of my kids. So it's what happened. Take food out to commander. Then there was the third thing that David was asked to do. And this is where the true conflict happens. Because David was asked by his father to bring back assurance. In other words, David, I want you to go out there. I want you to see what's happening. And please bring me back some good news. Bring me back the kind of news that will say that my kids are okay, that this battle is going to be won, that I don't have anything to worry about. Please bring me back that assurance. And I have to tell you, in the midst of what you and I go through, when the giants take place in our lives, all of us would love to have that sort of assurance. And that's where the conflict comes in. Because we know the obstacle that we have. We know I'm having problems in my family. So what assurance do I have if I stay faithful to God that's going to be taken care of? I know that my obstacle is debt. But how can I have assurance when I follow God that that's going to be taken care of? I know that I have a sickness or disease that is taking on my body. How can I have the assurance that God is going to take care of? And so there begins to arise within us a conflict. Like we're witnessing all these things happening, but how do we step into what's going on? So the challenge is this. What begins to happen is after David takes the supplies, I love David's resolve because David says, well, I brought all the food and I brought the supplies, but now they're going out to war. And David leaves the food with the supplier and he's like, the only way to find out how the battle's going is I've got to go out there. And so it says that he went out there and he stood there and he watched and he began to witness some of the things that were taking place. So he began to talk to his brothers. And what we find is this, and here where the challenge arises. The challenge here is that the giant defied the people of God. The giant was really challenging God in the situation. Are you going to see God in the midst of the giant? And so verse 23 says, as he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Now that's interesting because David's talking, trying to get the scoop of what's going on. And all of a sudden, here comes out the Philistine, and he begins talking. David's like, what was that? Did I just hear that right? And for David, what was interesting is this. David understood what the real challenge was about. The real challenge wasn't about the giant and about the people of Israel. For David, the real challenge was about the God that we serve. And so if you think of Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, where Paul talked to us and reminds us to put on the full armor of God, he reminds us this: for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. In other words, these giants that come up in our life are really just flesh and blood. They're just really things that we experience here on earth. They are not eternal. So even though disease may come on my body, it is not eternal. I know I will be free from that at some day. Even though I'm struggling with my finances, or I'm struggling to do vacations with my kids, or I'm struggling in my doubt, or I'm struggling in my insecurities, listen, those have no real hold on us because it doesn't affect our eternity. And so we recognize that our real struggle is, do you and I believe that God will take care of it? Do you and I believe that God will take whatever our situation is and bring glory out of it? And so then we get into verses 24 through 30, and here's where the confusion takes place. Because whenever the Israelites saw the man, talking about Goliath, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites have been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt him from the family taxes in Israel. David asked the men standing near, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes the disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he turned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom do you leave the few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now, what have I done, said David. Can I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the man answered him before. You see, in David's confusion, what you have to understand is this, is David had this belief in God. He looked at the Philistine, watch what he said. He said, this uncircumcised Philistine. In other words, what he was saying is this non-believer, this person that worshiped false gods, he's out here defying our God, who is the true God, who has proven himself over and over again. How dare he speak that way? And when David looked at the men, he was seeing the people of God who were terrified and were afraid. And David to himself began to be confused because it was like, why is everyone afraid? Don't we remember that God brought us from this battle, and he was with us in this battle? And if God was with us in each and every one of those battles, he will be with us again today. And church, you and I have got to ask ourselves the question, have we seen God work in the past? Then we can have faith that he'll work in the present, and we can have faith that he'll work in the future. Our difficulty is God may not do it the way we want. And so we struggle with that. You know, Pastor Alex, I didn't think about this first service, but I know the passage Pastor Alex shared about Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? What is most interesting about that passage is this. Jesus Christ himself prayed that this cup would be taken from him. And God's answer was, No. Our salvation was given with a prayer that was answered no. And sometimes the difficulty of what we go through may because God wants to glorify in another way. And we have to trust him in the midst of all that. And that's where David stood. And so he wondered, why are they afraid? So we move on in the story and we get into the next 3 C's. But when we look at verse 31 through 41 here, it says, what David said was overheard and repeated to Saul. And Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of the Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, you are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued it from from its mouth. When he turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Then Saul dressed him in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his hand. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in his pouch in the shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistines. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. Now there's a whole lot going on in that passage. But here's what I want you to understand, the conflict that is existing now. The conflict for David is, how do I stay true to what God has called me to be? And what I mean by that is David believes that God can take care of him in the situation. But when Saul hears about it, Saul begins to remind him that you're young, that you're not a warrior. And he begins to list all the things that he's not. And David has to wrestle with that, but that's not who I am. So here's what I need you to see about me. I was a shepherd. I'm a shepherd. I fought a lion and I fought a bear and I won. This dude is no different than them. And so David understood who he was, and he had to project that within Saul. Man, there must have been something in that speech that he said, because Saul's like, yeah, go do it. But when he went off, this is what Saul did. Saul said, but listen, here's what I want to do for you. I want to put my armor on you. I want you to take my sword, and I want you to take my helmet. And that's how I want you to go into battle. And I think that's pretty fair, right? Because if I'm going to fight a giant who's got all this metal on and all this armor, like I want to put that on as well. But when David put all that on, he said, I can't move well. And David says, this isn't the way that I fight. And if you put this on me, I won't do well. So it says he stripped everything away. And then he said, and I'm going to take 5 smooth stones. Now that's incredible to me, by the way. And let me tell you, church, and I want you to be careful of this. When you are going through giant life situations, there are going to be people that will come into you and they want to talk to you and they want to help you. But what happens at times is they'll try to put things on you that are not who God made you to be. And you have to be careful of that. Even in the ministry, as long as I've been preaching now, I'll still have times where people would say, you know, Pastor Chuck, if you wanted to do this ministry, or this is what the church needs to be like, then they want to tell me everything that I should do and how I should preach and what topics I should stay on. And the problem is this, the things they are asking me to do is not who God has asked me to be. And so if I try to put on what they're projecting on me, I don't do well. Why? Because that's not who God made me to be. There are other people that do some of that stuff they're asking. They do it well. Why? Because that's who God called them to be. And I've realized even in this church, if people are asking me to do something different and it's not who God called me to be, then there may be times that I just have to step out and say, we need another person to do that. Because that's who God called them to be. And so I want to say to you, like some of you, listen, we look at David and we look at that boldness and we say, man, I wish I could speak like that to Goliath and be like, oh yeah, Goliath? Let me tell you a thing or two, but listen, Some of you, God didn't give that sort of charisma. God didn't give that boldness. God didn't give that voice to. And so for you to come out and just put somebody in their place, it doesn't come out well. Why? Because that's not who God made you to be. Some of you are better at being quiet and doing things behind the scenes. And God says, that's what I need you to step into. Because that's what I've called you to be. Some of you are great with sympathizing with people. Like you'll hear their concerns and you'll hear their hurts and you're able to sit with them and talk with them and love them in the midst of all that. That's who God's called you to be, and step into that. Others of you don't have any sensitivity. So don't show up in those places, all right? You're not going to help. Some of you are the life of the party. Like you have this energy about you, and we need you to step into some situations and provide some good hope and some good cheer. But there are some times when people, they need to just chill for a moment, and they need to wrestle with what they're in, and they don't need a joke at that time. Like step into who God's called you to be in the appropriate moments. Don't let somebody else put all their stuff on you. Just be who God wants you to be. And so then we move on. And we had, and by the way, if I was David, I'm not sure that I would have operated like he did, But it says he picked up 5 smooth stones. I would have been finding the most jagged stone I could, right? Okay? I would have made sure that stone did some damage. But it said he put 5 smooth stones. Why? Because that's the weapon he was used to using. That's what he knew how to sling the best. And so that's what he went with. And I want to tell you all this, is that God has given you some weapons to be used for his glory. And that's what you need to step into. And so we get into verse 42 through 51a. And it says, he looked David over, and this is Goliath, because I love this approach now. Goliath, by the way, is now sizing up David. All right? He says he looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come out with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David said to the Philistine, and this is what we said earlier, you come against me with the sword and the spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those who gather here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it all of you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching in his bag and taking the stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into the forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from his sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. Man, what a powerful imagery is happening. In the midst of all this, and this is what's crazy to me, David is really stripped of any protection. And the only thing he has is the weapon that God has taught him how to use over and over again. The Philistine sizes up David and says, this guy's too handsome. He can't attack me. He can't beat me. And what's interesting to me, too, is David goes out there, has no shield bearer. Goliath has a shield bearer in front of him for his protection. The Philistine starts coming out to him. David runs because he doesn't have all that weight on him. And he strikes the Philistine dead. And he says, it's not by my power, but it's by the power of the Lord. You know, church, what you and I need to do is we need to quit sizing up the obstacles or the giants in our life. And what we should start sizing up is how big is our God. No obstacle that you will come across is bigger than the God that you serve. And the problem for most of us is that we'll size up the obstacle and we forget how big God is. And you would say, what? But it's this big. Yeah, but your God's bigger. Yeah, but this disease that I have, your God created your body. He knows how to deal with it. But you don't understand. But God does. And your God is bigger than anything that you will ever face in your life. And you know what some of us need to do? some of us need to stand before the giants in our life. And we need to look the giant over and say, enemy, you're trying to attack my body physically. Enemy, you're trying to attack my family. Enemy, you're trying to get me to worry about all the debt that I've incurred. Enemy, you're trying to make me think that I'm not worth anything, that I have insecurities and that I'm not valued. Enemy, you want me to think that I have no friends and that this world means nothing to me. And enemy, you want me to think that God won't show up, but I want you to know, devil, that I'm part of the Lord's army and I will strike you down with his power. And it's not because I have any abilities, but it's because God does the work. And at the end of the day, I may not get what I want, but he will be glorified in it. Even if I die, God will be glorified. You know, I've been sitting with people in some death experiences right now, and they don't understand why they're experiencing this thing. And you know what I see as an outsider? I see God bringing their family back together. I see people on their deathbed who are able to speak to their family members because they won't listen to them at any other time. But in a moment of death, they begin to listen, and God is glorified. And I would say I wish it could be done another way. But I have to tell you, I wish that my salvation was done in a different way as well. But Jesus had to die in order that I was saved. You see, my God is bigger than any of those obstacles that come along my way. You know what? At the end of the day, David cuts off Goliath's head, which, you know, I mean, for us in our culture, it's kind of a crazy act, right? But when David picked up that head, guess what he had finally? You remember his third conflict early on? He was supposed to bring back assurance. Hey, Dad, we took care of the giant. We got him. The boys are coming back safe. And at the end of the day, even with what you go through, God's going to give you the assurance that you need. What's interesting to me is when we get through 5:1b through 54, is the confusion that exists is this, is our trust in God confuses the world, but in the end, we win. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sharon road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from the chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. You see, they didn't understand, like our big Goliath just died. And they were confused and they ran. And here's the thing I want you to know. When people see the giants that you face in your life, and they see you still true and faithful to God, the world is confused. How can you still believe God in the midst of all you're going through? You know why I can still believe that God is there? Because I've seen the God, the way he works in the past. I've seen what he's doing in my present. And I know that he'll continue to be for me in the future. It may not be the way that I wrote it out. But God's story is a better way to tell something than mine is. And I think there's power in that. You want assurance? The assurance I'll give you is this. God will never leave you nor forsake you. And he's preparing a place for you in eternity. And that's what we cling to. I'm going to ask that you stand with me this morning, church. And I wasn't going to do an invitation this morning. And I'll tell you, God was just at work in people. And I really believe that he's at work as well as you today. I don't know what those giants are in your life right now. But here's what I want to ask you to do. If you got a giant you're facing, I just want to ask that you come down the altar right now. And you can either stand or you can kneel. But I just want you to bring that to God. And again, I don't know what that obstacle is. And I don't have to. This is just between you and God. But I want to encourage you right now as I play a little bit of this song. And I'll just give you a little bit of time. But if you're facing a giant right now and you would say, I just want the church and I just want... Listen, the Bible tells us if we need healed, if we need an obstacle taken out of our way, it says, call the elders of the church around you and pray. And so I want to invite you this morning to come down the altar. And I want you to give that thing to God and let us join you in prayer. So if that's you today, just go ahead and come forward where the song's being played.
Thanks again for listening. If you are located in the Marion area, we would love to have you join us at one of our Sunday morning gatherings. For directions, service times, and information about our fantastic children and student ministries, please visit us at dayspringwesleyan.org. That's dayspringwesleyan.org.